Hey everybody, I'm Adam, and this is Think Club. So I thought I would have some fun today and take a look at another Rationality Rules video. This is Rationality Rules' most popular video on Jordan Peterson. It's called Jordan Peterson's Truth Debunked. Now, I had made one video addressing one of Rationality Rules' videos, and people had said to me, and these are obviously Rationality Rules supporters, Jordan Peterson detractors, that I was not giving Rationality Rules a fair hearing, that Rationality Rules is addressing Jordan Peterson's arguments in his videos. So I wanted to take a look at his most popular video to see if he actually is addressing Jordan Peterson's arguments or mischaracterizing Jordan Peterson's arguments. Now, I have nothing against Rationality Rules. He's a YouTuber. I've never met him. I know that he has it in for Jordan Peterson, and that's fine. Jordan Peterson is a public figure now. You can have your own opinion about Jordan Peterson. I am here because I am interested in these arguments. I am genuinely interested in what Jordan Peterson has to say, and I'm curious if he's right about his argument. But before we can actually assess his argument, I think it's important that we understand his argument. So that's what I want to do. I want to take a deeper look at this argument that he's putting forward. Now, I listened to Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris's first podcast where they talk about this topic of truth. I listened to it when it first came out, probably within the first 24 to 48 hours of the podcast being released. And I have to admit, I was completely on Sam Harris's side. I thought what Jordan Peterson was doing was strange. It mystified me. I didn't get it, but it was fascinating to me because it really seemed like a puzzle. The guy obviously was smart, and he said a few things that really stuck out to me. They were very strange, but logically consistent.
You can't wait around for next Tuesday on the cusp of death to finally make your epistemology indelible.
We do that all the time. You know, there's a scientific theory that everybody says, oh, it's true. It's true. The theory of ether, that's a good one. It's true. It's true. It's true. Didn't account for this. Well, I guess it wasn't true, even though we thought it was all along. That happens all the time.
Of course, but it doesn't happen on the basis of a single variable, which is whether or not enough people survive. I mean, forget about the fact that this Darwinian criterion.
No, we're willing to rewrite the history of what's true based on far less evidence than that. And that's a good thing. But, you say yourself, well, science is always prone to correction by the discovery of errors in the future. So I don't see why that's any more radical than what I'm claiming.
Strange, right? But totally accurate. We do saddle up with theories all the time that we think are true. And then something happens and all of a sudden we'd lived our lives through this very long period of time believing something that was totally factually incorrect. So I was very, very conflicted about this podcast. Nothing he said in that podcast really seemed logically inconsistent to me, but intuitively it felt wrong to me. I didn't understand why he was clinging to a notion of truth, which is so vastly different from the notion of truth that I and most of the people I know commonly conceive of as truth. But as someone who is fascinated by a good puzzle, I dug in. I wanted to know more. So I feel I have a good understanding of the argument that Jordan Peterson is putting forward here. And I do not actually believe that Rationality Rules has that same understanding of the argument here. So to make that case, I am going to point out 3 places where Rationality Rules makes statements in his video that are completely incorrect. And if you understand Jordan Peterson's argument, you know immediately that these statements are false, that he is misrepresenting Jordan Peterson's idea of truth. Now, in this video, Rationality Rules ascribes a motive to Jordan Peterson, which I don't believe is accurate. I don't think it's actually Jordan Peterson's motive. And he says so in 2 places. He says,
I'm convinced that he's one of the most overrated public intellectuals of our time, and that this is especially the case when it comes to his views on religion. In fact, I will go so far as to say that Jordan Peterson is the Deepak Chopra of Christianity.
So he basically makes a claim here that Jordan Peterson is just making incomprehensible, feel-good arguments. And then he goes on to say,
why does Peterson want to nest not only our perception of realist truth, but realist truth itself within Peterson truth? Is it perhaps possible that he has a motive? Well, I'm convinced that he does. You see, this sleight of hand comes in extremely useful to apologists such as Peterson, because when he's asked a question to which he has a justifiable answer, such as, is it true that there are only two sexes, he can, and does, answer according to the realist definition of truth. But when he's asked a question to which he doesn't have a justifiable answer, such as, is it true that a literal historical man called Jesus resurrected, he answers according to the Peterson definition of truth.
So Rationality Rules in his video is actually making an argument as well. Rationality Rules is making the argument that Jordan Peterson is using a definition of truth that allows him this wiggle room so that he can use one definition of truth in certain circumstances and another definition of truth in other circumstances. So it's a completely self-serving act. He has no other purpose for doing this other than the fact that he wants to deceive his audience. It's a completely nefarious goal that he has. Now, never mind the fact that Jordan Peterson has stated his goal on many occasions, and we could just take him at face value when he says things like,
this is how it looks to me. We essentially need something approximating a low-resolution grand narrative to unite us. And we need a narrative to unite us because otherwise we don't have peace.
And then Jordan Peterson goes on to explain the unifying grand narrative that he believes has facilitated Western society's ascendance. A grand narrative he believes we are altering rapidly at our own peril. He's also talked many times about how he feels we are eroding our ethics, our ethos that we have inherited, and how he believes in a very Nietzschean sense that atheism is a part of that erosion.
And I have some sympathy for the naive fundamentalists. It's like what they're basically saying is something like this. Look, we have an ethos that's valuable. You scientist types are casually dismantling it. What the hell are we supposed to do?
So as someone who's watched a lot of Jordan Peterson's work, I think Jordan Peterson has been very open about his goals. If you read his book, 12 Rules for Life, the subtitle of the book is An Antidote to Chaos. He's worried that young people do not have a stable ethos that they're able to adopt readily, an ethos that's an embedded part of culture that has been time-tested by a Darwinian process. These people are forced to develop their own ethic on the fly. And those ethics that they're developing, the ethics that they're adopting religiously, are things like social justice and feminism, which he thinks are dangerous for society. They're untested ethics that we are testing at very great risk. So I don't think Jordan Peterson is casually redefining truth simply so he has a out when somebody corners him with an uncomfortable question. So if you begin with that assumption that Jordan Peterson has an actual argument, the question is, what the hell is he talking about? How does this work? So here are the three places where Rationality Rules obviously does not understand what Jordan Peterson is talking about. And no fault on Rationality Rules. These are very difficult topics. You need to put some persistent brain power to actually unravel what he is saying here. And I am very familiar with this topic, and even I find it difficult. So I put together some visual aids that will hopefully help. I come from a scientific, materialist, rationalist, empiricist perspective. So I tend to elevate factual truth or objective truth above metaphorical truth or what Jordan Peterson would call wisdom, what he calls in the first Sam Harris podcast wisdom. but I understand the argument that Jordan Peterson is making. And I actually think there is a fundamental weakness to this argument that I'll mention as well. I don't think Rationality Rules never touches on that, but Rationality Rules doesn't really understand the argument. So first off, Rationality Rules says this.
Peterson is asserting that because we can only perceive objective facts subjectively, there are no objective facts. But that's not how it works, and it's not what all of the evidence indicates.
So this is very far from what Jordan Peterson is asserting. Jordan Peterson is asserting that there are infinite number of facts and that those facts need to be hierarchically ordered. And we do this all the time. If we are against a particular political position, we order the facts that support our position above the facts that disconfirm our position. It's the exact same thing that Rationality Rules is doing in this video. Jordan Peterson believes in objective facts. Jordan Peterson is a scientist. Reality alert. Jordan Peterson was a professor at Harvard, okay? He believes in facts. This assertion that Rationality Rules makes is bonkers. Jordan Peterson believes in objective facts. He says that the way you order those objective facts is subjective, which, newsflash, it is. So then he goes on to say this.
If Peterson and his ilk want to call that which serves life, or that which increases human flourishing, true, then that's fine. Again, it's confusing because it means, for example, that if the fact that atoms store potential energy should one day prove fatal to us, then while this fact will remain true in the colloquial/realist sense of the word, it will all of a sudden become false in the Peterson sense of the word.
Okay, this is completely false. Peterson does not think that facts are a subjective thing. The amount of energy stored in an atom is an objective fact. What Peterson's truth is based on is something that we might call wisdom. And what Peterson is saying is that if we are annihilated by nuclear weapons, then it probably wasn't the wisest thing to order our interests in those particular facts, placing an interest in nuclear weapons close to the top. It is an unwise thing to do, not an untrue thing to do. And Peterson says this in the original Sam Harris Jordan Peterson podcast.
It's possible for there to be scientifically correct, realistically true conceptions of the world that are bad for us. There are not many examples of that. I think the utility of knowing what's going on is usually so high that it's better to know what's going on. But for instance, I mean, the example I occasionally use is there is a right way to synthesize the smallpox virus. To point out that this is dangerous, to point out that it would be irresponsible to spread this knowledge, to point out that in the wrong hands, this could be catastrophic and in fact could end the human experiment, right? Mm-hmm. The career of the species. So it could be very anti-Darwinian, to use your framing, in a local sense with respect to Homo sapiens, because this could be the thing that kills all of us, right?
Right.
That's, yes, catastrophic, fine, but that doesn't undermine the scientific truth value of...
But it undermines, I agree, but it does undermine the claim that scientific truth is the ultimate truth. That's the claim that it undermines.
See, Jordan Peterson is saying that the truth claim about the amount of energy in an atom is still correct. He is saying that there are two separate claims.
That doesn't undermine the scientific truth value of...
But it undermines, I agree, but it does undermine the claim that scientific truth is the ultimate truth. That's the claim that it undermines.
And Rationality Rules ignores this, doesn't understand it. I'm not sure which it is, but I'd like to give him the benefit of the doubt. But Rationality Rules claim that Jordan Peterson doesn't believe in objective facts is just bogus. I'm not sure how Rationality Rules can make this larger claim that Jordan Peterson is doing this to deceive us when he doesn't even understand the argument that Jordan Peterson is making. So here is the third thing that Rationality Rules says that really seems divorced from Jordan Peterson's actual argument.
Peterson is conflating our perception of reality with reality itself, the map for the place, as it were. Peterson is asserting that because our ability to perceive facts and reality is nested in Peterson truth, therefore facts and reality is nested in Peterson truth. which is akin to me asserting that because you're currently perceiving me in 2 dimensions, I am 2 dimensions.
So Rationality Rules is saying Jordan Peterson is conflating perception and reality. But Jordan Peterson's argument doesn't even involve perception. Jordan Peterson's argument is about action. He is saying as Darwinian creatures, we must act on insufficient information. That once those actions are tested through a Darwinian process, we can infer that there is scientific truth nested inside the actions that we have verified through behavior. Now, that scientific truth may be unknown to us. We test models of behavior all the time that we don't necessarily know why they work. It has scientific truth nested inside a model that we are unable to access. These models Peterson would call true enough, but the scientific truth, the reason why they work, is hidden. The larger point here is that at no time does Peterson argue that our perception is reality. This doesn't happen. This is a Deepak Chopra argument. This is not a Jordan Peterson argument. Now, I want to dive into the actual argument that Jordan Peterson is making.
Imagine for a moment that the invention of the hydrogen bomb did lead to the outcome, which we were also terrified about during the Cold War, which would have been, for the sake of argument, either the total elimination of human life or perhaps the total elimination of life. Now, the latter possibility is quite unlikely, but the former one certainly wasn't beyond comprehension. And so then I would say, well, the proposition that the universe is best conceptualized as subatomic particles was true enough to generate a hydrogen bomb, but it wasn't true enough to stop everyone from dying. And therefore, from a Darwinian perspective, it was an insufficient pragmatic proposition and was therefore, in some fundamental sense, wrong. And perhaps it was wrong because of what it left out. Maybe it's wrong in the Darwinian sense to reduce the complexity of being to a material substrate and forget about the surrounding context.
So what Peterson is saying here is that he is evaluating the truth value of certain models by what results they produce. These models obviously have smaller scientific truth claims embedded in the models that we use as tools, he says explicitly many times, but we don't always have access to those smaller scientific truths. And I believe it's one of the reasons why he is trying to make this switch between conceiving of objective truth as the more important, more valuable truth than the moral truth, the truth that guides action. Peterson wants to elevate moral claims above scientific claims. Ultimately, Peterson is arguing that our values have become divorced from societal accountability in profound and dangerous ways. Now, the root of this problem is the decoupling of objective truth and societal values. As finite beings, we are always forced to act on insufficient information. That is why Peterson uses the term true enough. As finite beings, we ask ourselves, does a strategy work well enough to solve specific problems in specific context? Does it work better than other possible or available solutions? These strategies are then tested through this Darwinian process of survival and reproduction, with the strategies that work propagating and the strategies that don't dying with the organisms that implemented them. Modern science now appears to be functioning outside of this ongoing Darwinian cycle, but it's an open question as to whether or not this decoupling is sustainable. Objective facts are independent of action, allowing science to function at its own pace. But as humans, we don't have this luxury of time. We must act in every given moment and act with the best available, though incomplete, facts, models, and strategies at our disposal. This situation always forces us to act on insufficient data and with strategies that are ultimately validated not by their scientific truth value, but by their survival and reproduction value.
The only final way of sorting out whether a scientific claim is sufficiently true is through Darwinian means. Because I think that the Darwinian process is the only way of adjudicating truth. Now, you don't accept that, and that's fine. I mean, it's not like what you're doing isn't coherent.
This is why Peterson places Darwinian truth as the highest value and defines scientific truth as tools nested in or at the service of Darwinian truth. Now, this makes perfect sense if you consider the fact there are millions, if not billions, of scientific facts that never affect human action. Any unmoored objective truth which cannot be embedded into action doesn't share its utility in this larger unifying Darwinian truth. So all Peterson is doing is pointing this out. He is arguing that the modern scientific endeavor as a tool has been functionally decoupled from the larger truth he himself admits you might call something like wisdom. Now, part of Peterson's project includes the goal of recoupling factual truth and wisdom, with wisdom governing the search for and the integration of factual truth, which is scientific truth. Peterson is making the claim that it's impossible for Darwinian creatures like ourselves to interact with the world without goal pursuit. These goals require models of the world which guide our action. As finite beings, we are forced to create models with incomplete information, thus ordering the facts that we have at our disposal. Because of this fact, Peterson is saying the only truth validation of these incomplete models is trial and error. If we execute the model, do we achieve our goal? If so, we infer the model is true enough. Now, there are most likely scientific truth claims nested within this model that we cannot know in the objective sense. It's for this reason that Peterson places these objective facts as a lower order truth claim. Now, of course, we stumble onto objective knowledge all the time, but if this knowledge is not embedded in action, embedded in this higher order truth or wisdom, if it does not become part of a better model that works more efficiently at achieving our goals, then what use is the information? Peterson is pointing out that it's these incomplete models that house this higher order truth. And the truth value is really inherent in any model's utility. Any model which fails at achieving its goal is untrue. Any model which reliably achieves its goal is true enough. But if you have a model that is true in the scientific sense, but doesn't aid or facilitate action, then it can't be embedded inside this larger truth, the truth that facilitates action towards a goal. Science is true in a decontextualized, explanatory sense, but for scientific facts to be true in a contextualized Darwinian sense, they have to be embedded into models and actions that are true in the sense that they do a better job at achieving our goals. Peterson is arguing that these truths are the deepest, the most meaningful truths, since they facilitate and participate in our actual survival as both individuals and as a species. So I don't necessarily know where rationality rules is coming from, because he's making this kind of non sequitur argument that Peterson's multiple levels of truth are changed somehow by our perception, which is not the argument that Peterson is making at all. And I'm curious if he's getting this argument from Deepak Chopra, because it sounds like a Deepak Chopra argument. The idea that our perception shapes reality, I think, is very Deepak Chopra, but it has nothing to do with the claims that Peterson is making. These claims, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson argued about for 2 hours, 2 hours on the first podcast and another 2 hours on another podcast, because Sam Harris understands Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson's argument is not unintelligible to Sam Harris. Sam Harris isn't looking at Jordan Peterson and saying, "What are you saying? What kind of word salad is this?" He understands the argument that he's making. He just disagrees with him.
But I think of science as a tool rather than as a description of reality. And, that's where we differ. And it's fair that we differ. It isn't obvious which of those two positions could be held to be correct. Because, you could say that the more we learn about the objective world, in your realist manner, the higher the probability that we'll survive. And it's conceivable that those things are aligned in that manner. But it's also conceivable that they're not. And I'm wary of that, because radical changes produce unintended consequences. And we've lived relatively successfully as primates for, a couple of dozen million years, and we're transforming things pretty damn rapidly. One potential outcome is that in 500 years, we're more machine than human, and that we're not really human at all in any realistic sense. And I can't necessarily see that as you could claim that that's a positive outcome, but it isn't necessarily that it's a positive outcome.
You're choosing, following Nietzsche here, you're choosing to use the word true. You're choosing to freight it with some moral concerns that will make it very difficult for people to understand what you mean and for you to understand what they mean when you use truth as a synonym for, as you just said, correct. A fact may be correct, but it's not true.
Right.
It seems to me this is counterproductive, and you lose nothing by granting that the truth value of a proposition can be evaluated whether or not this is a fact worth knowing or whether or not it's dangerous to know.
No, but that's the thing I don't agree with, because I think that that's the kind of conception of what constitutes a fact that does in fact present a moral danger to people, a mortal danger to people. And I also think that that's partly why the scientific endeavor, as it's demolished the traditional underpinnings of our moral systems, has produced an emergent nihilism and hopelessness among people that makes them more susceptible to ideological possession. I think it's a fundamental problem, and I do believe that the highest truths, let's put it that way, the highest truths are moral truths. I'm thinking of that from a Darwinian perspective.
So hopefully that makes more sense. This is a very complicated topic, and I may do another video where I dive into the metaphorical truth that Brett Weinstein talks about and how that relates to this scientific truth nested within moral claims. Let me know in the comments below if you're interested in this, because sometimes I feel like this is real trivial pursuit level stuff. The only reason I really wanted to make this video was to show that Rationality Rules is just completely misrepresenting Jordan Peterson's argument. He's pulling out these little sound bites, and he's trying to paint Jordan Peterson as incomprehensible word salad. And he's doing his audience a huge disservice, because he's not illuminating Jordan Peterson's argument. He's really hiding Jordan Peterson's argument. So as always, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious what you think of this video. And if you think I got anything wrong, if I'm incorrect about any of this stuff, hey, by all means, point it out.
Well, first of all, if you don't have a purpose, it isn't that your life becomes neutral in a meaningless sense. It's that your life becomes characterized by unbearable suffering. Because the baseline condition of life is something like unbearable suffering.